With the recent news of former President Joe Biden's cancer diagnosis, it raises the question of what prostate cancer is and how it affects one's day-to-day life. Prostate cancer is a malignant mass of cells that grow on a man's prostate gland. Men ages 50 and older, men with a family of history of prostate cancer, and African American men are most at risk of prostate cancer. Carson Wong, a urologist at Marietta Memorial Hospital, says it's important to get tested for prostate cancer.
Early diagnosis gives better options. The earlier you diagnose, hopefully the less aggressive or less involved it is. It is hopefully localized to the organ of concern, and therefore you have more options available to you for treatment and better outcomes of those treatments.
For more information about prostate cancer and how it's treated, you can visit our website at WTAP.com.